Gentlemen, I must begin by making the awful and solemn declaration that after 18 centuries of Christianity, the object of the Prince of Peace has not been attained. War still exists, and therefore it is necessary to speak of soldiers and sailors. But the Divine Carpenter will have his revenge, and his revenge will be complete when, by means of labour which he emancipated and glorified, war shall cease throughout the whole world. In a large measure, labour is already organised in England, and the working man is learning day by day his own value. But this is at best but a partial step towards peace, and it needs that the English example should be followed upon the continent, and the movement become cosmopolitan. When once the foreign workman has realised his own powers, powers which surely we can teach him can be asserted without anarchy and the disruption of society, when shameful wages and shameful hours and the abominable sweating system depriving men of the fruits of their labours shall have ceased universally, as they have begun to cease in England, then the patient pleadings of the Carpenter of Nazareth will be realised, and man, the temporal redeemer of the earth by the sweat of his brow, shall refuse to be manipulated by his brethren either in the sweating dens of financiers, or on the battlefield, or in the armies maintained at present at an impossible cost by politicians, or by monarchs for their own selfish purpose. The Carpenter will have his revenge, and therefore it is not utopian to suppose that a day will come when war shall cease. But while it is well to have those higher ideals before us, it is certainly foolish not to look things in the face and realize what they are at the present moment. And above all, it is our duty as their employers to recognize the crushing evils that today exist among our soldiers and sailors. A man is drawn into the ranks of the army on practically false, I say shamefully false pretense. Nominally, he receives £1 a day and rations. What are the facts? Threepence out of every shilling is stopped to supply extra food necessary for his bodily health, whether he will or no. A halfpenny is compulsorily stopped for washing. Thus his shilling becomes 8pence halfpenny. But these deductions do not stop here. Barrack damages, library, haircutting, and oftentimes other compulsory subscriptions make a still further reduction, so that at the end of the week the shilling is seldom more than 7pence. Until he gets his shilling per day and his accounts are simplified so that he can easily understand the deductions made, you need never expect to enlist efficient and intelligent men. Again, he is supplied with a nominally free kit, but the uniform part, if it does not fit him, which is usually the case, is altered at his expense. This kit is by government renewed from time to time, but his underkit, consisting of 3 pairs of socks, 2 shirts, 2 towels, 1 little bit of soap, and other things necessary for what is called cleaning, he has to maintain 7 long years. He has to show his kit monthly, and if he is lacking in any of these articles, or they are not in good repair, he has to pay for new ones. And he is punished as well. For such causes, I have often known a soldier driven into a state of practical sullen rebellion, out of heart with his profession, out of heart with his officers, a man most dangerous to himself and especially dangerous to the society in which he lives. This kit question must be settled upon an honourable basis. Again, the present short service system is a great hindrance to recruiting. The lodging houses of England are full of soldiers in the reserve living on the 6pence a day. 7 years, the best of their lives, have been taken, rendering them unfit, according to the testimony of employers of labour, for ordinary work. The deferred pay, amounting to £21, is just enough to allow them to revel in a month or two of debauch, not enough to enable them to set up any useful business. Of course, there are very many exceptions to this description, but there are a large number of these men loafing around public houses, a continuous warning to mothers and fathers to prevent their boys from becoming soldiers or sailors. The pay in the Navy is a little in advance of that in the Army, but there a man has to buy and keep up all his whole kit. Very often, a new captain demands a new kind of rig, and so men are being constantly put to a practically unnecessary expense. Even a chief petty officer who, after qualifying in gunnery and torpedoes and diving, becomes gunnery instructor and then captain of a turret, only receives 5 shillings and a penny per day. This is a man of such true intelligence and attainment that in civil life he would be receiving a very large salary. It is fair, of course, to add that he has a pension in view, but so few men attain all these qualifications that they hardly affect the question. But it is not merely a question of pay. It is surely a question of risk as well. These men carry their lives in their hands for your sakes. It is a noble thing truly to die for one's country. But if you leave a wife and children behind to beggary and worse, surely the country does not fulfill her part of the bargain. I need not refer to the shameful management of the patriotic and Victoria funds, but shameful as is the provision made for widows and orphans in the Victoria case. Happy, you may say, is the woman whose husband happens to die in a crowd. If he had fallen overboard on a stormy night or been killed pursuing a slaver on the African coast, his wife and children would have got nothing at all. It is this awful uncertainty about the future of those he loves best that is the continual menace to the peace of mind of the soldier and sailor. One little incident will illustrate the heartlessness and cruelty of the Admiralty. A man's kit is his own. If he dies on board ship, it is auctioned on board amongst his comrades, who always pay a great deal more than its value and send the money home as a loving present to his friends. But because the Victoria went down, the men who were lost in her had no compensation allowed to their relatives. The men who lived got something inadequately small. It is this red tape of the Whitehall officials that strangles the loyalty of the blue jacket. But there are other difficulties which I am bound, though unwillingly, to mention. Practically, marriage is forbidden to the soldier, at least for the first 5 years of his service, and then only a few are allowed on the strength of the regiment. God's apostle says, "It is better to marry than to burn." Many of these men marry. Out of their pay is 7p per day. What can they give their wives? It means that the wife has no recognised claim for support on her husband at all. Either she tries to follow the regiment at her own expense, with the chance of being sent back by the government, or drags on a miserable existence, married, yet practically unmarried. It is almost impossible to imagine the lives of these women as they are spent in Portsmouth and other military centres. The sailor, on the other hand, is allowed to marry, and a certain portion of his pay he can allot to his wife. But when I tell you that in the case of an ordinary seaman, this amounts to £1 per month, and as his rating increases, a little more is added, I hardly do more than ask to imagine what a wife with little children can do under circumstances like these. If wrong comes out, and Jack, who for our sakes has practically surrendered wife and children, receives a wound to his honour which is worse than death, a very stab in his heart, gentlemen, on whom lies the blame? But there is another side of this question worse than marriage. Think of these strong, vigorous, well-groomed, fairly fed men, with all to make their body strong, their passions powerful. Think of them living separated altogether from womankind, with the common talk of the barrack room or of the lower deck ever surrounding in their ears, centred on such sinks of iniquity as Portsmouth, Plymouth, Chatham, Aldershot, and other garrison towns where the streets are beyond measure disgraceful. In Portsmouth, for instance, which I know well, there are to be found on the Hard at the very dockyard gates no less than 14 buildings constructed and carried on for the sale of intoxicating drinks, 12 being fully licensed houses out of a total of 26. The post office, where sailors have very frequently to go, stands between a group of 7, 5 being next door to each other on one side and 2 on the other. Out of the Hard opens Queen Street, the practical thoroughfare of Portsea, with a very large number of public houses in it, and several alleys and courts. You can hardly call them streets, which are practically full of brothels. Is it any wonder then, to quote the words of His Worship the Mayor of Portsmouth, that even in this garrison there were nearly half the men in hospital owing to the repeal of the C.D. Acts? Is it any wonder that the Admiralty and War Office have communicated with Lord Clanwilliam and the General commanding at Portsmouth and other garrison centres, telling them to take steps with the civil authorities to ameliorate these evils?